Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Connie Snyder, and I'm a First Link coordinator with the Alzheimer's Society of Saskatchewan at the Saskatoon Resource Centre. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Alzheimer's Society of Saskatchewan's Evening of Education, Self-Compassion, an umbrella for our rainy and snowy days, presented by Donna Goodridge. Next slide, please, Donna. We just want to thank our sponsors. The Evening of Education is brought to you by our presenting sponsor, SGI, and proudly supported by SaskTel Telcare, Our Lady of the Prairies Foundation, and Biogen. And before we get started, I just wanted to do a couple of housekeeping items. And so to let you know that we will be recording tonight's session, but there will be no names of the attendees shown on that recording. The recording will be available to folks later on our YouTube channel. Along with your Zoom link for tonight's session, you should have received a copy of the presentation and an activity sheet. The formal presentation for this evening will be about an hour, followed by a question period. Please type your questions into the bottom near the bottom of your screen marked Q&A. Not the chat. The only way that we'll be able to take your questions is through that Q&A this evening. We will have moderators who will read, summarize, and present the questions to our presenter, Donna Goodridge. We would ask that you keep your questions relevant to the topic this evening that's being presented. And if you do have questions outside of this topic, please don't hesitate to reach out to one of our society staff at the 7 resource centers across the province, or by calling our Dementia Helpline. Next slide, please. Prior to our presentation, I'm going to just provide you with a quick overview of who we are and what we do at the Alzheimer's Society of Saskatchewan. So here you see our vision and our mission. Our vision is a world without Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, and our mission is to empower all people to live well with dementia while funding research into prevention, cures, and quality of life. We are a board-directed charity that was incorporated in 1982. And a couple of things that of note are that a person does not need to have a formal diagnosis in order to access our services or to connect with us. And also that we support and can provide resources and knowledge about many types of dementia, not just Alzheimer's disease. Next slide, please. So as a client, what can you expect from the Alzheimer's Society? You can expect individualized information and support for both the person living with dementia and their care partner. We try to work with each individual client and learn their stories to provide the right information, support, and strategies at the right time. And with the client's permission, we provide intentional follow-up at least every 6 months. We host an array of learning opportunities such as tonight and throughout the year on a variety of standalone topics. In addition to those evenings of education, we have a variety of learning series courses to help people with dementia, their family and friends to learn more in order to live as well as possible with dementia. The courses build upon each other, covering the continuum of the disease. The courses you can learn more about those upcoming events on our website under the Programs and Events tab. And we will be offering 2 of those learning opportunities, Care Essentials and Next Steps for Families, over the next couple of months. Clients also make connections through support groups where they have a chance to exchange information with others living with and affected by dementia, access the most current information, learn and share practical tips for coping with change, decrease feelings of loneliness and isolation, express feelings and be reassured that these feelings are normal, and to find a sense of hope. These groups have been offered virtually and by telephone during the pandemic. Minds in Motion is another program that we offer, and it's a 2-hour per week program that combines physical activity and social activity for those in the early stages of dementia, and a friend, family member, or paid caregiver. These programs are being offered in person in Saskatoon and Regina and virtually across the province. We're also here to connect you to other organizations. Staff can provide clients with information about services available through the Saskatchewan Health Authority, other government agencies, and many other private and community-based organizations that help a person along the dementia journey. Next slide, please. So what's on the agenda for tonight? We do hope that you leave here this evening understanding a little bit more about self-compassion, the practice of self-compassion, and how it can be used in your daily life to help yourself and others. We hope that you'll be able to identify the proven benefits of self-compassion. And also we hope that you'll learn where to find some accessible resources to explore the practice of self-compassion. It now is my pleasure to introduce our guest presenter. Dr. Donna Goodridge is a professor in the College of Medicine at the University of Saskatchewan and a registered nurse. Her passion for work with older adults started when she was in high school and worked in a long-term care facility in Winnipeg as a healthcare aide in the summer and on weekends. Her interest in older adults continued in the variety of clinical positions she held once she became a professional nurse, which included work in home care, acute care, and at Riverview Health Center in Winnipeg, where she was a clinical nurse specialist in gerontology and palliative care for 13 years. She went on to complete her master's and doctoral studies at the University of Manitoba and moved to Saskatoon in 2004 to join the University of Saskatchewan, first in the College of Nursing and then in the College of Medicine. She has a long-standing collaboration with the Saskatoon Council on Aging and is currently working with them on a survey to understand the issues and challenges faced by older adults due to COVID-19 so that we can be better prepared for the future. Her other research interests currently include long COVID and obstructive sleep apnea. On a personal note, Donna was the primary caregiver for her mother, who lived with dementia for the last 5 years of her life. Developing a self-compassion practice was an important part of her caregiving experience and has proven useful as she has navigated many of the challenges life has presented. In this presentation, she'll be sharing some of the practices and insights that she has with respect to self-compassion. Her research team has also developed an 8-week online program for caregivers to strengthen their self-compassion muscles during these challenging times. Welcome, Donna.
Well, thank you so much, Connie. I just wanted to say thank you to the Alzheimer's Society of Saskatchewan for the opportunity to be able to share this presentation and hopefully pique your interest in this very important practice. I want to begin by just, I guess, a commentary on society. You know, we spend a lot of time thinking about what's wrong with the world, what's wrong with people, what's wrong with me, what's wrong with others. And for many years, medicine and psychology have really focused on what's wrong with people, what needs fixing, what needs correcting. And when we, you know, this is an interesting focus because it focuses on our weaknesses. It focuses on what's wrong instead of what's wrong, what's right. And it really, you know, places a lot of attention on the negative. And even though that has a really important place in both medicine and psychology and in our daily lives, we know that this kind of disease-focused model has some really important limitations. Focusing only on fixing what's wrong doesn't necessarily lead to more well-being. Strategies that might help us to reduce feelings like anger, fear, or depression don't automatically result in more joy or meaning or peace. And, you know, when you think back on all the events of your life, as I do with my own, you often find that the times that you grew the most were the times when something really difficult happened, something you didn't want to happen. And maybe because of that, you learned a new way of coping or a new way of being resilient. And building on the strengths that we already have and learning new ones actually takes us into a new way of thinking that's gained a lot of traction in the last few decades. We do need to work on what's wrong and fix the problems that we can, but we also need to work on building our happiness muscles, on our well-being muscles. And just before I go on to the next slides, I have to admit I am a dog person. And so for the cat people out there, I'm sorry if you know, some of my dog photos don't work. I'm a parent of a 8-month-old Australian Labradoodle, and I have to say she stretched me in many ways. So that's just my disclaimer. So, you know, one of the things that was in the handout that was circulated, and I know not everyone has had time to read it, but I think it's a really important thing to consider and to look at before you actually get started on self-compassion. And one of the first things you have to do is actually explore and understand some of the barriers you might have yourself about what's preventing you from being nicer to yourself, from being more self-compassionate. And it's going to be different for everybody, and it's dependent on your own life circumstances and your own beliefs. And one of the things that is important to do is, what are your core beliefs about yourself? And, you know, what are the things that you really think about yourself? And a lot of times those things are not necessarily very positive. It's harder to do this than we think. You know, like when you think about what defines you, this is a really important thing to spend some time thinking about, and it's not just something that you can do in kind of the spur of the moment. So I would urge you to you know, just even reflect on this. And interestingly, you know, I don't know about you, but sometimes when I read things, I think, oh, you know, yeah, okay, it tells me to write it down, but I don't have time or I can't be bothered. But I have to say that writing things down makes a huge amount of difference. And it's much more effective if you know, if you want to start this journey, to actually write these things down, because, you know, once you got it written down, it's there in black and white, as opposed to a thought floating around in your head. So one way to do this is to really reflect on, you know, once you establish your core beliefs, like, well, I'm a shy person. That might be one of your core beliefs. And so how does that belief about being shy make you feel? And when did you develop that? What were the things that sort of told you that you were shy? And when you're in social situations, what might trigger that belief about, well, I'm a shy person? Like, are you a shy person? And how would your life be if you didn't think you were shy? So that's an example of a core belief we have about ourselves. And we all might have different beliefs. But I think, you know, key to you know, the process of going a little bit deeper is understanding what is it that you think about yourself. So that was one of the exercises in the handout, and I think that it's certainly something that is kind of almost a preliminary exercise. So when we think about the opposite of what's wrong with people, we ask what's right with people. And self-compassion falls under the realm of positive psychology. And positive psychology is really quite different. It's, you know, I don't know, as a university student, you know, we were all really interested in learning about, you know, the weird and strange things that psychologies that people had about how maladjusted they could be. And, you know, we always tried to figure out, you know, where our own problems were. But positive psychology is really different. It's a different and really complementary approach. And it's really dedicated to try to study and understand and apply positive interventions that can increase our well-being through things that are under our own control. I wanted to share with you a study that I thought was really interesting. And it was about writing and imagining a best possible self. So we know that people can increase their sense of gratitude. You know, we might think that, oh, well, we're just not maybe as You know, we always look on the gloomier side of things, and maybe that's just how we are, and we're never going to change because we're too old. That's, you know, that's one of the things, or that's just how I am, and that's how I always was. But in one of the studies, you know, people kept a journal of how they were feeling for 10 weeks. And in one arm of the study, people were told that they had to describe 5 things they were grateful for every day. And another arm of the study, people had to list 5 things that really irritated them every day, or really bugged them about their day. And at the end of the study, people that in the gratitude group, where they actually had to list these 5 things they were grateful for, reported fewer health complaints, fewer symptoms of physical irritants, and were generally engaging in much more healthy behaviors, and even spent more time exercising than people in the irritation group. So I think you know, there is a lot of good evidence that just because we've always been a particular way, or we see ourselves in a particular way, there are things that we can do to kind of bolster our own well-being. And so tonight I'm going to be talking about one area of positive psychology that can have really positive impacts on the people who practice it, and that is self-compassion. I've got a few screens going here, so I'm going to make sure okay. So I like this vision of self-compassion as being an umbrella, you know, for our rainy days and snowy days. And it doesn't mean that things are always going to go the way we want. You know, the rain's going to fall as it falls, the snow's going to come as it comes. And sometimes, if you're like me, it feels like not very much is going right. And it's certainly a truism that, you know, in your life, you have encountered, and you will encounter, and you'll continue to encounter frustrations and things that don't go right, losses. You'll make mistakes and bump up against, you know, your own limitations and fall short of the things that you really want to do well. And, you know, as a caregiver, I really felt that, you know, I had very high expectations. You know, as a nurse, especially as a nurse who'd looked at caregiving, who felt really comfortable in dealing with older adults and had, you know, a fair amount of knowledge about dementia. You know, my lived experience, I was not in keeping necessarily with my expectations. I had extremely high expectations of myself as being the perfect daughter who was never going to make a mistake, never get frustrated, never get angry. But, you know, this is a human condition, and that's the reality that's shared by all of us. And the more you open your heart to that reality, that this is the human condition, we're all going to make mistakes, things aren't going to be perfect, the more you'll be able to feel compassion for yourself and actually everybody else in your life. So when we think about compassion, you know, it's interesting. So much of our language goes back to the Latin, and the Latin root word for compassion is pati, which means to suffer. And the prefix com means to suffer with. So compassion, which originates from compati, really just means to suffer with. And the definition of compassion, because I think that's a good foundation for us to start with, is concern for the alleviation of suffering of ourselves and for other beings. So this slide is really, you know, what do we mean by self-compassion? What actually is it? And there's really 3 things that self-compassion is comprised of, and they're like 3 pillars holding up a house. The first one is mindfulness. The second one, it's not really a word, but you can think of it as kindfulness. And the third one is connectedness. And that, I find those are 3 kind of easy things for me to remember. When we think about mindfulness, you know, it's everywhere these days. We hear all about the benefits, everybody's doing it. You know, it's so mainstream compared to where it was 10 years ago. But mindfulness doesn't necessarily mean you're going to like what you find when you're mindful, when you really look at what's occurring in the moment. It doesn't mean everything is going to be goodness and light. But what it does mean is that in combination with compassion, it can help you to make space for what's happening, even though if you don't like it very much. So mindfulness is really not passing judgment. It's being non-judgmental. It's being receptive to what's actually happening in this moment. What am I feeling right now? What are my thoughts and feelings? And not trying to suppress them and say, oh, I shouldn't be feeling like this, or deny them, saying, no, that's wrong, I don't want to do that. It really means seeing what is, what's happening right now, and remembering that all of our thoughts come and go. We aren't our thoughts. You know, you think about how frequently our thoughts change, and how, you know, even within the space of an hour, we can range from being sort of very calm and peaceful to, you know, quite upset if something happens, and then calming down again. Just, I think, remembering that our thoughts come and go. So self-compassion really requires observing those thoughts and feelings and taking a balanced approach to our negative thoughts. So we want to acknowledge them, but we definitely don't want to dwell on them. We want to relate to our personal experiences and recognize that we're not the only ones that are suffering, because I think that's one of the things that happens to many of us is we start to feel really isolated when we get into difficult situations. We start to feel like we're the only ones. I think mindfulness also stems from that willingness to, you know, observe our negative thoughts and emotions with clarity, with just inviting them in for tea, as they say in some traditions. You know, inviting that anger in and saying, what is it that you're telling me? What is it that you're asking me? And I think one important thing is that, you know, we can't ignore the pain that we're feeling and also feel compassion for it at the same time. We have to really, we have to sit with it. We have to be with it. We have to let it tell us what it wants to tell us. And I think the other thing to remember with mindfulness is that we can't be over-identified with it. We can't sort of be swept away by all the negative reactivity that, you know, that sometimes just happens. So when we talk about kindfulness, it really means a state of being warm and understanding, because we're all going to suffer in some ways. We're all going to fail. We're all going to feel inadequate. And, you know, instead of ignoring that pain and just pushing it in the back of the drawer, way to the back so that we don't have to think about it, or beating ourselves up with self-criticism, we actually take it out. And I heard a really nice description today about self-compassion, and it was referring to our problems as we would care for an infant. You know, when the infant is smiling and happy, we're happy to hold it in its arms and share our love and attention with it. But when that infant is crying and difficult, we don't put it aside. We still hold it in our arms, and we still pay attention, and we still care for it. And that's actually the same attitude that we need to have with ourselves. So self-compassionate people start to recognize that, you know, being imperfect and failing and having difficulties is inevitable. That's the human condition. So they tend to be a little bit more gentle with themselves when they're confronted with difficult experiences. And recognizing also that we can't always be what we want. You know, sometimes, I don't know about you, but I look at sometimes the things I see us telling, you know, children about they can be whatever they want. Well, you know, if I wanted to be a 6 foot tall supermodel, like, that's just not going to happen, because that's just not me. And so I think as we mature, we understand we can't always be everything we want, and we can't get exactly what we want, but we're pretty special as we are. And so when, you know, when I think we try to fight against what is, we actually do ourselves harm. We increase our own stress. We increase our own frustration. We become really self-critical. But when we can actually accept that, yeah, I'm only 5'3", and this is me, and I'm not going to be a supermodel, or I'm not going to be an Olympic athlete. I can accept that. You know, this is me. I can accept that with sympathy and kindness, and actually try to achieve some kind of greater balance. The last part of self-compassion is connectedness. And we do all get frustrated at not having things go as we would like them to. And somehow it's only human nature, and this has been documented in a lot of research studies. It's just human nature for us to think that, you know, I'm the only one that this has happened to. I'm the only one who's suffering, or I'm the only one who's making mistakes. Everybody else is perfect, or everybody else is much better. And I think when we think about the very definition of being human, I mean, we're mortal, we're vulnerable, and we're not perfect. And that's part of what makes us special. So I think self-compassion really recognizes that suffering and personal inadequacy is something that's part of that whole shared experience. I think it's interesting that the Chinese symbol for mindfulness is a combination of now and heart. And in Chinese calligraphy, the word mindfulness is represented by two characters. This, I don't know if you can see my pointer there. This top character means a shelter. And that means it represents the word now. And below that is the character for the word heart. So when we think about what it means to be mindful, it actually means bringing our heart into the present, into the now. So it's really opening your heart to what's happening right now. And at this point, I just want to take just a couple minutes to try a few minutes of mindfulness with you. So hopefully you're all in a comfortable position. And I'm just going to ask you to take a few long, slow breaths. Usually sort of breathe in for 3, 2, 1, and then out for 3, 2, 1. In for 3, 2, 1, and then out for 3, 2, 1. So the first thing I'd like you to do is take a look at what you can see around you, and notice 5 different things that you don't normally see in the room around you. Things like maybe a shadow on the wall, a crack in the wall, maybe a spot that you didn't notice before. Just pick 5 things that you can see. And then second, notice and name 4 things that you can feel. So 4 things, and this could be, maybe it's the texture of your clothes, or the surface of the table you're sitting at, the feeling of the pen in your hand, feel of the book. 4 things you can feel. Now notice 3 things you can hear. So it might be the hum of a refrigerator, or the sounds of traffic, maybe your dog's barking, maybe your cat's meowing. 3 things you can hear. What about two things you can smell? It's just the smell of your coffee. And finally, notice one thing you can taste. Might be the taste in the air of in the room around you. It could be whatever you're having to drink. It could be that delicious chocolate bar that you're eating. Now that was a pretty quick and easy exercise to kind of help to bring you to the state where you're noticing what's happening right now. What is happening exactly in this moment? And that's mindfulness. That's part of mindfulness. It's the start of mindfulness. And mindfulness is one of the pillars of self-compassion. And it definitely gets easier the more you practice it. I really like this. This is another dog picture, but I think it's totally true. Well, you know, the guy is sitting there thinking about his car and the trip he's taking in the house and how many bills he has to pay. The dog is sitting there thinking, I'm here in this beautiful landscape with my person. And that's why the dog's happier. Because the dog is in the present moment. So there are a lot of misconceptions about self-compassion. And one of the primary ones is, you know, self-compassion is just self-pity. It's really soft. It's just, if I feel self-compassion, I'm just going to feel really sorry for myself. But that's actually not true. Because when we feel really sorry for ourselves, we feel really alone and isolated. When we feel self-compassion, it actually connects us to others. And self-compassion is like a muscle that can be strengthened with practice. And it does mean recognizing that we're mortal, we're vulnerable, and we're imperfect. So self-pity is one of the misconceptions about self-compassion. The other misconceptions about self-compassion is that, oh, if I start thinking about self-compassion, it's just going to make me weak, and it's just it shows I'm a selfish person. I'm just thinking about myself, and I'm self-indulgent. I'm just going to be like this pooch here who's, you know, totally enjoying his or her, you know, time under the sheets. But, you know, self-compassion actually puts more fuel in your tank so that you can help yourself better, and you can also help others better. So self-compassion really means being warm and understanding to ourselves when we suffer, when we fail, when we feel inadequate, instead of either ignoring our own pain, just carrying on and not paying attention, or else beating ourselves up with self-criticism. Self-criticism is actually self-defeating, and it's not the same as having an honest appraisal of our weaknesses and challenges. The more we listen to that critical voice inside our heads, maybe it's the voice of a parent we still carry around with us, and they're chastising ourselves. The more we actually try to protect our fragile egos, because that's why we have an ego. You know, that's we're trying to protect that sense of self. And the more we do that, the more actually we become more insecure and defensive and anxious. We all fail sometimes, but sometimes self-criticism turns our failure into defeat instead of giving us a chance to learn something from our challenges. Oops. Now, some of the evidence that comes out has been really interesting about self-compassion. And what the research is showing us is that what we think actually affects our body. It affects our chemistry, it affects our blood pressure, it affects our immune system. So self-compassion includes the practice of self-soothing. And as infants and as children, we started to develop that ability to calm our own fears. to get to sleep by ourselves, for example. And somewhere along the way, we lose some of that ability to self-soothe as we grow up. You know, our problems get larger and more real, and we don't have maybe our parents or somebody else to take care of them. On the right side of the slide, what you can see is, I think, some interesting work that's been done on, it's called the chemical of caring. It's called oxytocin. And when we soothe our own pain, we actually help ourselves. We help ourselves to release this particular hormone. And oxytocin is released in a whole lot of different situations. When a mother breastfeeds her child, when parents interact with their kids, when somebody gives a hug or receives a hug. Self-compassion actually can increase the level of oxytocin. So that means that feelings like, really positive feelings like trust and calm, safety, feeling very safe, feeling generous, feeling connected. And it also helps us to feel warmth and compassion for ourselves. So because these thoughts and emotions have the same effect on our body, whether they're directed towards ourselves or to others, self-compassion can actually change our body chemistry. It can be a powerful trigger for the release of oxytocin. Now, self-criticism has a totally different effect on the body. Whereas oxytocin is part of our mammalian heritage, the mammalian part of our brain, the fight and flight part of our brain is actually part of what they call the reptilian brain, the very, very ancient brain. And it was detected to quickly detect what's threatening in the environment. So when we detect something that's really threatening, our fight and flight response is triggered. The amygdala that's in our brain, it increases our blood pressure, it increases our adrenaline, and also the hormone cortisol, because we need strength. You know, our body is telling us we need to do something about this. We need strength and energy because we have to either confront this threat or we need to run away and avoid it. And even though this system was designed by evolution to deal with, say, physical attacks way back when, it can be activated just as easily by emotional attacks. And it's not just emotional attacks from others. Sometimes we attack ourselves. So I think this is really important to think about that body-mind connection here. Some of the recent research that has looked at self-compassion, sorry about that, shows that when we generate feelings of self-compassion, we actually decrease those cortisol levels, the stress hormone. So in one study by Helen Rockcliffe and her colleagues, researchers asked participants to imagine that they were receiving compassion and feeling it in their bodies. And every minute during this intervention, they were told things like, allow yourself to feel that you're the recipient of great compassion. Allow yourself to feel the loving kindness that is there for you. And those participants that were given these instructions had lower cortisol levels just after the imagery than the people that weren't given those kinds of instructions. And there was also more heart rate variability, which is a good thing afterwards. So the safer people feel, the more open and flexible they can be in response to their environment. And this is reflected in how much their heart rate varies. So that you could say by giving themselves compassion, participants' hearts actually really opened up and they became less defensive. So when we soothe our own painful feelings with self-compassion, we're not only changing what we think, our mental experience or our emotional experience, we're also changing our body chemistry. And this is really critical. An effective part of self-compassion practice then is to tap in to our body's own ability to heal itself through our physical sensations. So I really like this poster. I'm a work in progress. And I think reminding ourselves, no matter what age we are, that we're still a work in progress is incredibly important. Self-compassion recognizes again, that being imperfect, failing, experiencing difficulties, they're inevitable. So we need to be gentle with ourselves, because sometimes getting angry and upset and critical actually doesn't change the situation. Self-compassion means taking a more balanced approach so that negative feelings aren't suppressed. We don't just shove them in that drawer, or we don't ruminate over them. We don't spend a lot of time getting our, have you ever gotten into that kind of cycle where you start, maybe something's not, it's bothering you, but the more you think about it, the more upset you get. And this often happens at night. And this is one of the reasons people sometimes experience a lot of sleep problems, right? Because they might start, just with a random thought, oh, I need to do this, or I forgot to do this. And then we build whole dramas, we build whole stories around, oh, what's going to happen? And, what are going to be the consequences, and things are going to be terrible. And then we just build ourselves up into a frenzy. So this particular approach, self-compassion, it recognizes that, that we're suffering, but also that other people are suffering. So it puts us into a bigger context than just ourselves. So if I were to ask you where you're stuck, I think this is a very interesting question, and one that, there's a few authors that I really like, and one of them is James Hillman, and he says, when he does workshops all over the world, he asks people to think about where they're stuck. So if I were to ask you where you're stuck, what would you tell me? And you might say, well, and actually this author says, no one's ever asked him what that means. Everybody knows what that means. But being stuck means, where do you have trouble moving on? Where do we keep regurgitating those same old tired stories about ourselves, about others in the world, the things that we keep bringing back? So being stuck means that we can't take a step back, and we can't consider whether there actually might be another way to look at the world. We can't see things with beginner's eyes, with fresh eyes, with the eyes of a child. And that's one of the reasons that we often go to other people for help or advice. And sometimes that's helpful, and sometimes it's not. With a self-compassion practice, you can actually start to learn that there might be other ways to see yourselves that you're not using. And instead of being the one who's always wrong, or isn't good enough, or doesn't measure up, or has never been smart enough, or pretty enough, or handsome enough, or thin enough, or whatever, rich enough, self-compassion really helps you to turn things around so you can see yourself in a new light. So this shared human experience is a really important part of the story. And it's something that, we focus on a lot, because in self-compassion practice, because when we think we're the only one, it's a very lonely place to be. But when you recognize that there are, hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of people experiencing the same thing that we are, and going through the same issues we are, it sort of makes things a lot less lonely. And knowing that there's a way through it, that other people have gotten through this situation, can give us actually, I think, quite a bit of hope. So self-compassion doesn't mean that we're puffing up our own views of ourselves. It doesn't mean that we're, there's a lot of focus on self-esteem, and there's a lot of debate about self-compassion and self-esteem. But self-compassion is something that's inside of us. It's something that lives in us. It's there when we need it most. It resides in us. It doesn't matter where we are or what's happening around us. We can still feel safe and secure. Whereas self-esteem actually often involves comparing ourselves to others. Does this person have more than us? Do they do something better than we do? And I really like the quote that's on this slide about comparison is the thief of joy. And I think this is probably even truer in these days of, social media, Instagram, all these things we see. Everybody is leading these charmed lives. There's a whole celebrity cult out there. We see people, they're, jetting off to these beautiful, warm, sunny places, and they're eating gourmet lunches, and we're seeing what's happening. And sometimes we forget that we only see what other people let us see. And often they don't let us see the issues they're dealing with. And, you know, it's really sad, I think, what social media is doing to youth these days, because it's presenting, you know, a really contrived picture of people's lives. And I think when we compare ourselves against other people, especially on social media, you know, they sometimes just seem to have so much better stories than ourselves. And I guess even a step before social media, I don't know how many of you still, or in the past, you had, you know, your Christmas letters, right? And I don't know about you, but most of the Christmas letters I got from my relatives just were, you know, all the beautiful highlights of the year, and it sounded great. And, you know, it was only sometime later that you found out that, well, there were some really terrible things that happened that didn't necessarily get shared in those Christmas letters. Self-esteem often depends on our performance, and we're constantly evaluating things. Is this person doing what they're supposed to be doing? You know, are we getting our money's worth? Comparing our own performance to other people is exhausting and it's demoralizing. But it's something that we all have to try to work at not doing. And I think, you know, when we think about self-esteem is a good thing. But inflated self-esteem can really make us feel really maybe too confident and superior. And I don't know if you can see this slide, but the child in the in the cartoon says, "I solve my low self-esteem by becoming arrogant." And that's definitely not self-compassion. So I want to go back again after this discussion we've had to sort of look at the definition. So when we want to review what's happening, and you know, self-compassion, according to Christopher Germer and Kristen Neff, are two of the co-founders of the Mindful Self-Compassion Center. They've got lots of wonderful resources online. It's really easy to find. They share them really freely. And what they say is that, you know, self-compassion is the capacity to comfort and soothe ourselves, to motivate ourselves. Because you know what, sometimes when we lose motivation, it gets really hard to keep going. So how can we continue to motivate ourselves when we suffer, when we fail, or we feel inadequate? Self-compassion can also be learned. So it's not, even if you say, you know, I grew up in a family and my generation or my family, we didn't believe in this. This wasn't anything that I grew up with. But if you're interested, you know, it can be learned. You can actually start to learn how to be a little bit more compassionate towards yourself. And I think this will also help to grow and sustain our compassion for other people. Now, I really like this slide, and I think, to me, this really sums up what it means to be self-compassionate. And it means treating yourself as you would a good friend. And I love this photo. Two old friends walking down the path, not sure who's supporting who, but they're on this road together. So I just wanted to share that with you. So self-compassion practice actually provides us, it makes an emotionally safe space for us to open to the things that we find difficult, to the pain we have. If we don't feel like we have the inner reserves that we need to deal with our challenges, you know what we do? We keep stuffing all the things that we can't deal with, all our negative thoughts and feelings, in this sack we carry around on our back every day. And every day that we have something we don't want to deal with, we push more in the sack. And you know what? That sack gets heavier and heavier, and we get more and more tired. And we burn out because we're lugging this old sack around. And maybe that sack starts to smell. And sometimes we just can't carry that sack because we're just going to buckle under the weight of it. Or it's going to develop a hole, and all that negativity that's in that sack is going to leak out all over everyone that we come in contact with and everywhere we go. So self-compassion is like a safety valve. It can provide the safety we need to mindfully open to our pain. So the questions that we need to ask ourselves, and that I encourage you to think about for yourself. So what do you need? What do you need to be safe? What kind of environment do you need? What kind of people do you need around you to feel like you're safe? Are there places that you don't feel safe? And why don't you feel safe? And what is it that's comforting to you? What's soothing to you? Because we're all going to be a little bit different. To be validated. And all of us have this need. I mean, we do have to, we protect ourselves. I mean, ourselves are our most, what was with us from the beginning. So what is it that we're going to do to protect ourselves, to provide for ourselves, and to motivate ourselves to keep going in spite of all the challenges that we have? I think this is a really interesting model that I want to come back to. And I think it helps to encapsulate some of the things we're talking about. And Paul Gilbert says that we have 3 ways of managing our emotions. One is our drive system. So we have a focus, we have a goal, we are going to do something. We're going to accomplish a task. That's our drive system. We have a threat system. We see something is happening, something is going to be catastrophic. We're going to need to deal with something. What is it that we need to protect? What do we need to survive? What is going to make us safe? And then the third model, or the third system in this model, is actually our soothing system. And that's where the whole self-compassion work comes in. And what is it that we do to slow down? What do we do to soothe ourselves? And that word soothe comes up a lot. How can we rest and digest what we're taking in? What is safe and kind and caring? And even though we don't realize it, a whole lot of us spend much of our time in either the drive system or the threat system. So either we're driving forward to get something, or we're putting up defenses to manage those threats. And when we're spending all of our time in those 2 systems, we're probably not spending as much energy with our soothing system. And a lot of people, that soothing system is underdeveloped. And so if you can see down here, we need balance between these 3 systems. And if one of them, if we're living forever in this threat system and not paying enough attention to the soothing system, say, we're going to get really out of balance. So I did want to stress again that there's really good research evidence that things like mindfulness practice actually change your brain, increase the gray matter density. So that's a really important part of our brain that can strengthen the things, the areas of our brain that are associated with things like learning and self-awareness. Emotional intelligence we hear a lot about. Interoception is an interesting word that isn't very common, but it is really our ability to sense what's happening in our own body. And we're not very good at that. There's always that interesting quote that Mr. Smith lives a short distance from his body. We don't always know we don't pay attention. We're not really very good at that because we're so focused on other things. So there is a lot of good evidence that all of these systems are interconnected. When we get hurried, when we get stressed or scared, we actually lose touch with that natural compassion that lives within us, that resides within us, that's part of who we are. And so mindfulness does help us to slow down, to see clearly, and to stay connected to those deepest values, those things that we talked about at the beginning about what are your core beliefs. So I do want to just spend a little bit of time talking about some practices that you could do. None of them are difficult, and you may connect, sort of feel more inclined to do one than the other, but one is to write yourself a letter. And, you know, we're so used to email these days. I don't know how many people have written a letter. I haven't written a letter for a long, long time, but I do believe in the strength of journaling and putting things on paper, because once I put something on paper, my thought on paper, I'm committed to that thought, and I can look back on it and I can be a little bit more observant, I guess, about what I was, you know, about what I might have been thinking at that point. So, you know, the first thing, and it's easy to do. Imagine or even an email. You could even write you're writing an email to your friend who's experiencing the same issue, although emails are usually shorter, although sometimes some people's get really quite a bit longer. So a person who's experiencing the same things that you're facing. Maybe it's relocation. Maybe it's a change in health. So your friend is experiencing the same things that you're facing. What kinds of things would you say to him or her? And then would you be able to say those things to yourself? Would you be able to use those same words for yourself? And if you don't think so, then what's stopping you from doing that? So writing yourself a letter is a first good practice. The voices in your head. We all have voices in our head. And we often have many voices in our head. But a lot of times the loudest one is the most self-critical one. And that's the one that can drown out all of the other voices. And sometimes we don't even realize, you know, we joke about talking to ourselves and how, you know, oh, it's only a problem if you answer yourself. Well, I talk to myself and I answer myself. And, you know, those are just different parts of myself and different voices in my head. But sometimes, you know, when we really, really pay attention to what is it that, you know, what are we saying to ourselves? We just have to stop and figure out whether those voices that are saying sometimes the things that are self-critical are really true. Is it really true? What are the words that are being used? And, you know, you think, what would you say to a friend in the same situation you're at? If your friend made the same mistake, forgot to pick up milk when they went to the grocery store, would you say to them what you might say to yourself? Oh, you always forget, you know, you're losing it, or whatever words you might normally use to yourself. Often we would never say that to a friend. And when we think about developing a self-compassion mantra, and a mantra just means it's a statement or a phrase that we repeat often. And everybody is going to feel comforted by different words, because it all depends where we came from and what we grew up with and what we find comforting. So, you know, think about what phrases would be meaningful for you to get hold of yourself when you're under stress. And a lot of people are comforted by phrases from their faith or from things they've read, or you know, Brene Brown has written an excellent book about about imperfection, and she's got many excellent. You know, she's also on YouTube. So if you have the chance to catch any of Brene Brown's stuff on imperfection, she's amazing. And I mean, she is has done so much to, I think, advance you know, science and work in this area. And part of what her recommendation is, you know, think about what phrases would be meaningful for you and keep them short. You don't want a whole long poem. And they could be things just like, I am worthy. One day at a time, 1 hour at a time sometimes. Or maybe I'd be at peace. So we're coming, you know, to the end of the presentation, and, you know, thinking about the next step of the journey. So in the handout, there were some things that that you could definitely look at, you know, potentially exploring. And they could be things like developing an awareness of triggers. You know, does somebody say something to you that sort of just gets your back up and makes you really, really uncomfortable and really angry and questioning what did they really mean when they said that? And I think, you know, we can't avoid those, but we need to understand what they are. Mindfulness, just simple things like what we did. You know, what's in the room around me? What do I smell? What do I taste? What is this beautiful apple actually taste like? Because sometimes our minds are everywhere except on what we're doing. Exploring difficult emotions or thoughts, and giving yourself space to think about what you might have been avoiding, and being your own best friend. So I wanted to just take 1 minute to talk about a program that we have. It's a research project, and it uses a mindfulness based self-compassion app and a website. And we also have, we're having weekly virtual meetings. We are led by a very competent, certified, I'm not a mindfulness self-compassion trainer, but Cesar Gonzalez from Winnipeg is, and he led our first session on Friday. And what the purpose of this project is to help care partners of people with dementia to sort of work on incorporating self-compassion into their daily lives. And what we'd like to know is, you know, how can self-compassion potentially help care partners to manage some of the challenges? So like I said, we started our program last week. And we will be running another ones beginning in January. Right now, the one that we have is running every week over 8 weeks. And in January, we'll be having, it's going to be an 8-month program where it's just once a month. So knowing everybody's schedules are different. So if you're interested in learning more about this, you have my email, or you can certainly contact Connie, and we can explore more about how you might be able to get involved with this. And the last thing that I want to say is just leave you on this picture of a woman who's just enjoying life. And the state of your life depends on the state of your mind. And so be kind to yourself. So thank you for coming, and I'm open to questions and comments. And I think Connie is going to just take over from here. Thanks, Connie.
Thank you so much, Donna. Before tonight, I was really excited about hearing what you had to share with us. And of course, you didn't disappoint me. So much of what you said just resonated with me in thinking about, you know, some of the questions that we hear from the people that we support every day and the things that we hear people talk about in our support groups and those sorts of things. So thank you so much. I don't think anyone will leave here tonight disappointed or not getting something. So if you can just advance to the next slide. If you haven't already done so, please take some time to put in questions in our Q&A spot there while I tell you a little bit more about the Alzheimer's Society of Saskatchewan. We do have the moderators that are going to be checking those questions, and they'll be potentially summarizing and rewording them just so that we can get to as many questions as possible tonight. So let's just talk briefly about the Alzheimer's Society research. Research funding moves us closer to life-altering treatments, better care and cures for Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. And the Alzheimer's Society funds research in partnership with the Alzheimer's Societies across Canada through the Alzheimer's Society Research Program. And since 1989, this research program has invested over $64 million into dementia research. Some examples of this research that this group has focused on is identifying potential new dementia medications, using brain imaging techniques to understand different forms of dementia, studying how diet and other lifestyle choices might delay the disease. They have also looked at improving quality of life and care delivery in the community and in long-term care settings. And those are just a couple of areas that they've focused on. If you could go to the next slide, please. In Saskatchewan, we also are investing in research. So in partnership with the Saskatchewan Health Research Foundation. And our focus here in Saskatchewan is similar to that as on the national level, where they're looking into finding treatments, causes and cures, and improving the quality of life for people in Saskatchewan living with dementia. We also try to connect people with lived experiences of dementia with the researchers here who are conducting the dementia-related research. So if you may be contacted by a first-line coordinator or a staff member of the organization to see if you might be interested in participating in some of the research. And, you know, Donna's Elios app, for example, is one really good example of that. Currently, we are funding a couple of projects through the Saskatchewan Health Research Foundation. One is led by Dr. Megan O'Connell, and her research project will be looking at whether or not virtual, culturally safe monthly support group sessions for caregivers of Indigenous people with dementia improves their ability to cope. Another research effort that's being led by Dr. Gary Groot and Dr. Carrie Mikluduff is about research in the Indigenous caregivers will be given touch screen tablets and small wireless routers that serve as a mobile Wi-Fi spot. And they'll be able to access special information and resources designed to help prevent caregiver burnout. Next slide, please, Donna. There we go. We do love our donors. I'd be remiss if, you know, at the beginning I talked a bit about how we're a not-for-profit organization, so I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about donors and donor dollars. The donations come in events as sponsorships, gifts left in wills, monthly donations, or as general donations to our society. And you were able to attend this evening of education today at no cost because of the generous donation of someone before you. So we do invite you to consider a donation to our organization. It truly makes a difference for people in Saskatchewan who are living with dementia. Donations can be made online or by phone, and you will receive a link to donate in the email that will follow tonight's presentation. Next slide, please. This slide just gives you a map of Saskatchewan, and with the Alzheimer's Society, we have resource centers across the province. And in 2021, 2020-2021 fiscal year, we provided services to 2,482 clients from 279 different Saskatchewan communities. Our shift to offering virtual and online programming has increased our ability to provide additional programs in these communities. If you have any questions about dementia or need someone to talk to, please call our toll-free Dementia Helpline number as seen on the screen, Monday to Friday during regular business hours, or you can contact one of the resource centers which are located in the communities listed here as well.